Kim Tae-ho's hands shook as he stared at the control panel in front of him. Outside the small communications bunker, he could hear the distant sound of explosions getting closer. The alien ships had been attacking New Eden for 3 hours now, and there was nowhere left to run. "Why won't anyone answer?" whispered Park Mina, the colony administrator. She was an older woman who had lived on New Eden for most of her life. Her gray hair was messy from stress, and her eyes were red from crying. "We've been sending signals for hours." Tae-ho looked at the emergency beacon again. The red light blinked, steadily, sending their desperate message into space. But space was big, and New Eden was far from the main shipping routes. Most people had probably never even heard of their little farming world. "Maybe we should try a different frequency," suggested Lee Kung-soo, the colony's head teacher. He was holding his young daughter close to his chest. The little girl had stopped crying an hour ago, but her eyes were wide with fear. Through the thick walls of the bunker, they could hear the alien ships flying overhead. The sound was like thunder that never stopped. Every few minutes there would be a massive explosion as another building was destroyed. The raiders were being thorough. They weren't just taking what they wanted, they were destroying everything. "I don't understand why they're doing this," Park Mina said quietly. "We have nothing valuable here, just farms and schools and homes. We're not soldiers. We don't have weapons." Tae-ho had been thinking the same thing. New Eden was one of the most peaceful colonies in this sector. They grew food and raised families. Their biggest excitement was usually the harvest festival every year. Why would anyone want to attack them? The communication equipment crackled with static. For a moment, Tae-ho thought someone was trying to respond, but it was just interference. From the alien ships, their technology was scrambling all the normal communication channels. "The grain storage facilities are gone," reported Jung Ho-seok, who had been monitoring the security cameras. His voice was hollow. "They just vaporized them. 50 years of work, just gone." Park Mina closed her eyes. Those grain facilities had fed not just New Eden, but several other colonies in the region. Without them, thousands of people would go hungry. But that didn't seem to matter to the raiders. "Keep broadcasting," she told Tae-ho. "Someone has to hear us eventually." Even as she said it, everyone in the bunker knew the truth. New Eden was too far from the major space routes. It's too small and unimportant for anyone to care about. The big military fleets were busy protecting the wealthy core worlds. Farming colony on the outer rim wasn't worth their time. The alien ships continued their methodical destruction. Soon, there would be nothing left of New Eden, except memories and the desperate signals still broadcasting into the empty darkness of space. In the cold emptiness of space, far from any star or planet, an ancient machine suddenly came to life. Terra 77 had been floating in the darkness for over a century, its systems powered down and forgotten. Most people thought it was just space junk left over from the old wars, but they were wrong. The machine's sensors had been listening all this time, waiting for something specific. When Kim Tae-ho's desperate message from New Eden reached the listening post, old circuits that hadn't worked in decades suddenly sparked back to life. The message contained special codes that only humans knew how to use. Codes that hadn't been heard for over 100 years. Deep inside the machine, something much more powerful was waking up. The Terra Defense Network wasn't just a computer program. It was an artificial intelligence that had been built during humanity's darkest period, when they had been forced to become the most dangerous species in the galaxy just to survive. AI had memories that went back generations. Remembered when humans had been peaceful explorers, spreading across the stars to build new homes. It also remembered when that peace had been shattered by alien attacks, forcing humanity to become something much harder and more deadly. And it remembered the promise that had been made when the wars finally ended. "We will sleep, the human leaders had said. Our children will live peaceful lives. But if they are ever threatened again, we will wake up." Now, as the AI processed the distress call from New Eden, it began to execute plans that had been waiting dormant for over a century. Across the galaxy, hidden transmitters that most people thought were broken communication satellites suddenly activated. They began sending out signals that sounded like random noise to anyone listening. But these weren't random signals. Were wake-up calls. On the trading station called Kepler's Rest, A small transmitter hidden in an old storage facility started broadcasting. The signal was weak and mixed with static, but it carried a message that would change everything. Farming world of Harvest Moon, another transmitter came online, then another on the mining colony of Iron Ridge. The signals spread like ripples across the galaxy, reaching places that had been quiet for generations. Most people who heard them just thought it was interference from old equipment. But a few people, scattered across dozens of worlds, heard something different. Something that made their blood run cold and their hearts race. The Terra Defense Network had been patient. It had watched as humanity's enemies grew comfortable and careless. It had seen how the galaxy had forgotten what humans were truly capable of when pushed too far. Now, as it coordinated the awakening of assets that had been hidden for over a century, the AI allowed itself something that might have been satisfaction. The sleepers were about to wake up, and when they did, the galaxy would remember why humanity had once been feared across the stars. Li Dongwu was arranging communication devices on his shop counter when the message came through. It was just 6 words on his personal device, but they hit him like a physical blow. The flowers bloom at midnight. He had never heard those words before, yet somehow he knew exactly what they meant. The small electronic component he was holding slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. His vision blurred for a moment, and then suddenly his mind was flooded with knowledge that wasn't his own. He could see himself disassembling advanced weapons systems, planning complex military operations, leading troops through impossible battles. But these weren't his memories. They belonged to someone else entirely. His great-grandmother had been a soldier, he realized. Not just any soldier, but one of the most elite warriors humanity had ever produced. And somehow, all of her skills and knowledge had been sleeping in his DNA, waiting for the right trigger to wake them up, thousands of light years away. Choi Hai-jin was reading a bedtime story to her kindergarten class when her device buzzed. The message was different from Dongwu's, but it had the same effect. The stars remember their children. As she read those words, something shifted in her brain. The children's picture book in her hands suddenly looked different. Instead of seeing colorful drawings, she found herself analyzing the room's tactical advantages. The windows could provide cover. The heavy desk could be used as a shield. The emergency exit led to a corridor that would be perfect for a defensive position. "Miss Choi?" asked little Park So-young, tugging on her teacher's sleeve. "Are you okay? You look scary." Hai-jin forced herself to smile, but her mind was racing. She knew things now that she had never learned. How to strip and reassemble a plasma rifle in under 30 seconds, how to coordinate orbital strikes, how to lead a team through enemy territory without being detected. Where had this knowledge come from? Meanwhile, on a cargo ship, traveling between the outer colonies, Song Jae-min was loading grain containers when his message arrived. The Guardians wake from their long sleep, as he read it. The grain shipment manifests in his hand suddenly. Made perfect sense in a completely different way. These weren't just food supplies. The shipping routes weren't just for trade. Everything was positioned exactly where it would need to be for a massive military operation. The grain containers could be converted into weapons storage. The shipping schedules matched perfectly with strategic military timing. It was as if someone had been planning this for decades. The truth was becoming clear to all of them. Their ancestors had been members of something called the Apex Guard, the most feared military unit in human history. When the Great Wars ended, these warriors had made a deal. They would retire, have families, and live peaceful lives. Their children and grandchildren would grow up as normal civilians, never knowing about their deadly heritage. But the agreement had included a safeguard. If humanity was ever threatened again, the genetic memories would activate. The peaceful farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers would remember what they really were. The sleeping warriors would wake up, and the galaxy would face the full might of human military power once again. The activation had begun. Once the memories had fully awakened, the three humans began to see their ordinary lives in a completely different light. Li Dongwu looked around his small electronics shop and realized it had never been just a shop at all. The communication equipment he sold to customers was actually part of a vast network. The repair tools in his back room were designed to work on military hardware. Even the location of his shop was perfect for coordinating operations. Across this entire sector of space, within hours, Dongwu had transformed his quiet store into something else entirely. The customer area became a command center, filled with screens showing star maps and troop movements. The storage room revealed hidden compartments containing equipment that definitely wasn't for fixing broken COM devices. His shop had been prepared. For this moment long before he was even born, Song Jaemin was having similar revelations about his cargo hauling business. All those years of moving farming equipment and construction supplies between colonies suddenly made perfect sense. The heavy machinery he had been transporting wasn't meant for plowing fields or building houses. It was weapons, armor, and military vehicles, all disguised as innocent civilian equipment. The shipping routes he had been following weren't random either. Every delivery had been carefully planned to position military assets exactly where they would be needed. The grain storage facilities weren't just for food. They were supply depots that could support entire armies. Jaemin realized he had been building a hidden military infrastructure for years without even knowing it. Meanwhile, Choi Hajin was making her own discoveries. The educational supplies she had been ordering for her kindergarten weren't really for teaching children. Computer tablets contained advanced tactical software. The building blocks were actually components for a sophisticated command system. Even the playground equipment outside her school could be quickly converted into defensive positions, as the three of them worked to activate their assigned roles. They began to understand the true scope of what was happening. They weren't the only ones who had been awakened. Across the galaxy, hundreds of other humans were discovering that their quiet, peaceful lives had been carefully constructed covers for something much more dangerous. The awakened humans moved with incredible precision, but they were completely invisible to everyone else. To their neighbors, they still looked like ordinary shopkeepers, teachers, and cargo haulers. No one suspected that the galaxy's most advanced military network was activating right under their noses. On New Eden, the alien raiders continued their attacks, growing more confident with each passing hour. They had destroyed most of the colony's defenses, and were now broadcasting their victory to other systems. The message was clear. Humans were weak and helpless, and anyone could attack them, without fear of consequences. But the raiders had no idea that every word of their boastful broadcasts was being recorded and analyzed. The Terra Defense Network was tracking their movements, studying their tactics, and identifying their weaknesses. The aliens thought they were winning, but they were actually providing valuable intelligence to an enemy they didn't even know existed. The storm was gathering, and soon it would be ready to strike. Commander Voss stood on the highest building left, standing in New Eden's capital city, watching the smoke rise from the destruction below. His reptilian skin gleamed in the firelight as he surveyed what remained of the human colony. It had been almost too easy. The humans had barely fought back at all. "Look at this pathetic display," Voss said to his lieutenant, a smaller reptilian creature named Krex. "They call themselves an intelligent species, but they can't even defend their own homes. No wonder the galaxy thinks so little of them." Voss had been raiding human settlements for months now, and each attack had been the same. The humans would send out desperate distress calls, huddle in their shelters, and wait helplessly for death to come. They never fought back with any real skill or determination. They were exactly as weak as everyone said they were. Should we finish off the survivors in the bunkers? Krex asked, pointing toward the communication facility where the humans were. Still hiding. Not yet, Voss replied. First, let's make sure the entire galaxy knows what happened here. He activated his ship's broadcasting system, sending a message that would reach dozens of star systems. This is Commander Voss of the Crimson Talon Fleet. We have successfully destroyed the human colony of New Eden. Let this be a warning to any world that, if sheltered to these worthless creatures, you will share their fate. The broadcast went out across the galaxy, reaching trading stations, military outposts, and government centers. Most who heard it just shook their heads sadly. Another human colony had fallen to raiders. It was becoming a common occurrence, and nobody seemed willing or able to stop it. But down in the communication bunker, something unexpected was happening. Kim Tae-ho was still sending out his desperate distress calls when suddenly his equipment crackled with an incoming transmission. For a moment, he thought it might be interference from the raider ships overhead. But then he heard a clear human voice speaking in perfect Korean. New Eden Colony. This is Captain Park Sung-ho of the Terra Defense Fleet. We are inbound. Maintain your position. The other colonists stared at Tae-ho in confusion. Park Mina was the first to speak. Terra Defense Fleet, I've never heard of. Any Terra Defense Fleet? Who is this person? Tae-ho quickly checked his communication records. There was no mention of any military unit called the Terra Defense Fleet in any of the official databases. As far as he knew, humanity didn't have any organized military forces beyond local colony defense teams, and most of those were poorly equipped. This is Kim Tae-ho, New Eden Communications Officer, he responded cautiously. Can you verify your identity? We have no record of your fleet. Identity, confirmed through genetic markers, came the reply. We are approximately 6 hours from your position. Do not surrender to the raiders. Help is coming. The voice cut off, leaving the colonists in stunned silence. None of them could understand what was happening. Where had this mysterious fleet come from? And how had they responded so quickly to the distress call? Above them, Commander Voss continued his victory broadcast, completely unaware that his easy conquest was about to become something very different. When the first human ship dropped out of hyperspace near New Eden, Commander Voss couldn't believe what he was seeing. The vessel was tiny compared to his massive war cruisers. It looked more like a cargo hauler than a military ship. Voss had been expecting some kind of desperate rescue attempt, but this was almost insulting. That's it? Voss roared, his reptilian voice echoing through the bridge of his flagship. One little ship? This is what humans call a defense fleet? His crew laughed along with him. Bah, the human ship was so small that it barely registered on their weapon targeting systems. It would take maybe 30 seconds to destroy it, and then they could get back to finishing off the colony. All ships, target that pathetic vessel, Voss commanded. Let's show these humans what real military power looks like. But as his fleet moved to attack, something strange happened. The small human ship suddenly accelerated in a way that should have been impossible. It moved so fast and so smoothly that Voss's gunners couldn't get a lock on it. The ship twisted and spun through space like it was dancing, avoiding every shot fired at it. What kind of pilot can fly like that? Whispered Krix, staring at the tactical display in amazement. Then the human ship's weapons activated, and Voss stopped laughing entirely. The energy readings were unlike anything in the galactic military databases. The weapons fired with surgical precision, hitting exactly where they needed to hit to cause maximum damage. Within seconds, 2 of Voss's cruisers were crippled and drifting helplessly in space. Impossible, Voss muttered. Humans don't have technology like this. But the small ship wasn't finished. It continued its deadly dance through the raider fleet, its pilot executing maneuvers that defied everything Voss knew about space combat. The human vessel moved like it could predict where every enemy shot would be fired before the gunners even pulled their triggers. More raider ships exploded. The human pilot seemed to know exactly where each ship's weak points were located. Every shot was perfect. Every movement was calculated. It was like watching a master artist at work, except the art was destruction. Sir, we're losing ships faster. Then we can count them, reported the tactical officer, his voice shaking with fear. Then more human ships began arriving. Not many, maybe a dozen in total, but each one fought with the same impossible skill. The pilots moved in perfect coordination, as if they could read each other's minds. They targeted the Raider fleet's command ships first, then the weapons platforms, then the engines. It was a systematic dismantling of everything Voss had built. Within 10 minutes, half of the mighty Crimson Talon fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The humans hadn't just fought back, they demonstrated a level of military sophistication that made the galaxy's most advanced civilizations look like amateurs. Captain Park Soonjo's voice crackled over the communication channel, calm and professional. Raider fleet, this is your only warning. Leave this system immediately, or we will destroy every ship you have. For the first time in his career, Commander Voss felt genuine fear. What happened next wasn't just a battle, it was a complete demonstration of what humans were truly capable of when they stopped pretending to be harmless. The Terra Defense Network had been tracking the Raider organization for months. Now it was time to use that information. Young Sora had been living a quiet life as a medical researcher. On the colony world of Haven's Rest, she spent her days studying plant diseases and helping farmers improve their crops. But when the activation message reached her, everything changed. Suddenly, she wasn't Dr. Yang, the peaceful scientist, anymore. She was Commander Yang, tactical specialist of the Apex Guard. Her medical research station became a military command center within hours. The equipment she had been using to study plant samples was actually sophisticated scanning technology that could track enemy movements across entire star systems. Her research assistants weren't really students. They were sleeper agents who had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Target identified, Yang said calmly as she studied the holographic display showing the Raider fleet's command ship. Eliminating leadership structure now. Her strike team moved with deadly efficiency. They had been ordinary colonists just hours before, but now they fought like they had been born for war. Every movement was precise. Every shot found its target. They didn't waste time or energy. They simply eliminated threats and moved on to the next objective. The Raider command ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The entire enemy fleet suddenly found itself leaderless and confused. Without their commanders, the Raiders began making mistakes. They exposed their weak points. They became easy targets for the human forces, but New Eden was just one small part of what was happening. Across 17 different star systems, similar attacks were taking place simultaneously. The Terra Defense Network had identified every major Raider base, every supply depot, every hidden stronghold. Now they were all being destroyed at the same time. On the trading station of Meridian Point, awakened humans had taken control of the Raider fuel supplies. On the mining world of Copper Ridge, another team had destroyed the Raiders' weapon manufacturing facilities. On the agricultural planet of Green Valley, human forces had eliminated the Raider recruitment centers. The galaxy's intelligence networks were going crazy trying to understand what was happening. How had humans suddenly become so organized and deadly? Where had all this military technology come from? Government officials and military leaders from dozens of species watched the news reports in shock. The humans they had known were supposed to be peaceful farmers and merchants. They traded goods and grew food. They didn't have armies or weapons or tactical expertise. But the evidence was right there on every news channel. Humans were systematically destroying one of the galaxy's most dangerous criminal organizations. And ruthless efficiency that made even the most advanced military powers look clumsy by comparison, the galaxy was beginning to remember something it had forgotten. Humans hadn't always been peaceful. It had once been the most feared warriors in known space. The Raider threat was completely eliminated within 72 hours. What had taken the galaxy's combined military forces years to contain, the awakened humans had solved in 3 days. Now came the harder question. What would happen next? Li Dongwu stood in his electronics shop, looking at the advanced military equipment that had been hidden there for decades. The screens still showed tactical displays and troop movements, But the immediate crisis was over. He could feel the genetic memories that had awakened in him starting to fade back into dormancy. The ordinary shopkeeper was returning, while the deadly warrior was going back to sleep. "I think I'm done with this," he said to himself, beginning to pack away the military hardware. I never wanted to be a soldier anyway. Within a week, his shop looked exactly like it had before the crisis. He went back to selling communication devices to farmers and fixing broken equipment for his neighbors. To everyone who knew him, he was just the same quiet electronics dealer he had always been. But now he carried the knowledge that if humanity was ever threatened again, he could become something far more dangerous. Captain Park Soon-jo made a different choice. Standing on the bridge of his command ship, he realized that the galaxy had learned an important lesson, but it might not last. People had short memories. In a few years, they might forget what humans were capable of and start causing trouble. "Again, we can't all go back to sleep," he told his crew. "Some of us need to stay awake, just in case." Park wasn't the only one who felt this way. Across the galaxy, dozens of awakened humans decided to remain active. They formed the core of a new human military organization, one that would be ready to respond if another crisis arose. They established bases on remote worlds, built new ships, and trained the next generation of human defenders. The political effects were immediate and dramatic. For generations, human colonies had been ignored by the major galactic powers. Trade agreements excluded them. Military alliances didn't include them. Most species treated humans like harmless primitives who weren't worth taking seriously. That changed overnight. Within weeks of the Raider crisis, human colonies were receiving diplomatic visits from species that had never bothered to contact them before. Trade routes that had bypassed human worlds suddenly started making regular stops. Military commanders who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant began asking for defensive partnerships. The Altarian Trade Federation, which had refused to deal with humans for over 50 years, sent a delegation to negotiate new agreements. The Centauri Defense Alliance, which had rejected human membership applications for decades, suddenly invited human colonies to join their mutual protection treaty. But the most important change was invisible to most of the galaxy. The Terra Defense Network had learned valuable lessons from the crisis. It began establishing new sleeper agents, creating better hiding spots for military equipment, and developing more sophisticated activation protocols. The network that had been dormant for over a century was now stronger and more prepared than ever before. The message was clear to anyone smart enough to understand it. Humans were peaceful by choice, not by necessity. They would continue to farm their worlds, trade their goods, and live quiet lives. But if anyone made the mistake of threatening them again, they would face the full might of humanity's military heritage. 6 months after the Raider attack, New Eden looked completely different. The burned fields had been replanted with crops that grew faster and stronger than before. The destroyed buildings had been rebuilt with materials that could withstand much more damage. To any casual visitor, it looked like a normal farming colony that had recovered from a terrible disaster. But Kim knew better. As he sat in his rebuilt communications center, he could see the hidden defensive systems that had been woven into every part of the colony's reconstruction. The grain silos weren't just for storing food anymore. They contained weapon systems that could defend the entire planet. The school playground had defensive barriers that could pop up from underground in seconds. Even the flower gardens contained sensors that could detect approaching enemy ships from light years away. "It's amazing what we can accomplish when we really try," said Park Mina, who had returned to her role as colony administrator. She looked like the same kindly older woman who had comforted the colonists during the attack. But now she carried herself with quiet confidence. She knew that New Eden would never be helpless again. Kim Tae-ho nodded as he checked his communication equipment. The devices looked exactly the same as before, but now he understood their true purpose. Every message he sent, every transmission he received was part of a vast network that connected human colonies across the galaxy. If another crisis arose, he would be ready to coordinate the response within minutes instead of hours, far away on other worlds. The awakened humans had returned, to their normal lives. Choi Hee-jin was back in her kindergarten classroom, reading stories to her young students and helping them learn basic math. But now she kept a subtle eye on the security systems built into the school. The children played happily on equipment that could transform into defensive positions if needed. "Miss Choi, you seem different lately, little Park," So-young said one day after class. "You're still nice, but you seem stronger somehow." Hye-jin smiled and patted the child's head. "Maybe I just learned that sometimes we're stronger than we think we are," she replied. Song Jae-min was back to hauling cargo between the colonies, but his shipping routes now served a dual purpose. Along with delivering grain and supplies, he was also maintaining the hidden network of military assets that had been positioned throughout the galaxy. His cargo containers still looked innocent, but some of them contained equipment that could turn a peaceful farming world into a fortress within hours. The Terra Defense Network had returned to its patient watching, deep in the darkness between stars. The ancient listening posts continued their silent vigil. The AI that had coordinated humanity's response to the Raider crisis was dormant again, but its sensors remained active. It monitored communications across the galaxy, tracking potential threats and maintaining the readiness of its sleeping agents. Other species had learned to be more careful in their dealings with human colonies. The message had been received loud and clear. Humans were peaceful, but they were not weak. They preferred to farm their worlds and trade their goods. But they could become something much more dangerous if the situation required it. The sleeping giants were dreaming again, but their dreams were lighter now. They knew they were protected by guardians who would never truly sleep.